as believers, as followers of Jesus Christ, to stay in his word, especially, it's always important, but especially now, in these times where we see the culture moving rapidly in the wrong direction, where the news that we hear, I believe it's intentional, but it is negative. It is counter to a biblical worldview, and it becomes very discouraging. And it's having the effect, or it could have the effect, and it is having the effect, of doing one of two things. It makes people angry, and they're frustrated, they're anxious, and then it also causes some people just to throw in the towel and give up. And we cannot do either one. We don't need to be angry. We don't need to be anxious. Scripture says, be anxious for nothing, but by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And we're called to be salt and light, so we can't throw in the towel and give up. So how do we sustain ourselves? Well, you've heard me mention it before, but Jesus tells us in Luke chapter 18, he tells the parable of the widow and the unjust judge. And he begins that with, men always ought to pray and not lose heart. And it's not just prayer, but it is persistence in the truth of God. And so we need to be reading the Word of God. We need to be meditating upon it. We need to be praying, and we need to be standing firm in our faith. And that's why this next story, my next guest, is encouraging, because I think the effort, and you've heard me talk about this many times, but it bears repeating, that the effort to shut down the churches was not accidental. I believe it was intentional. And we're seeing the results of that. Communities that are, devastated. I mean, you look across the country and you look at teen suicide and depression rates are up. You, obviously the political engagement is one, and I think that was part of the reason. But the church provides the Bible-believing church, the Bible-preaching church, is the salt, the preservation. It has the preserving effect upon communities and nations. And that's why it's so important for those that have been battling to meet, to be open, to be able to minister to their communities. And no place has that been more pronounced than in California. And Brad Dacus, president of Pacific Justice Institute, has been leading the charge among many California churches, and on Friday was able to secure a Supreme Court decision, a 6-3 decision on Friday that overruled California's Ninth Circuit. It slapped down Santa Clara County for their onerous restrictions on churches. And now churches can meet more freely, and I think we're on the way to seeing them back as they were before. And so this is a great victory. And Brad, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. I was real encouraged, and in fact, last Sunday I guest preached at a church, and 2 Sundays before that, guest preached at another church, and we're seeing things really open up. But Santa Clara County, the home of big tech, Silicon Valley, they were obstinate, Tony. They were just going to keep every church closed, no indoor services, and we got an injunction initially at the district court level, and then he reversed himself and stated, and the Ninth Circuit says, yeah, we keep Santa Clara, keep those churches completely closed. So we're very pleased to get the emergency injunction that we sought from the Supreme Court granted 6-3. It's not easy to get an emergency injunction, but this court sees it, and it should be a major encouragement, a major light at the end of the tunnel for us in our struggle to make sure that this does not happen again in the future. And I'm very optimistic that we've got the precedent to keep this total shutdowns of churches from happening again in the future.
So, Brad, explain to our listeners what this means with this emergency injunction by the Supreme Court. Is this the final word? What might be next?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. It's not the final word on the case. What it means is, because it's being heard on the merits before the Ninth Circuit. You know, that's looking at all the facts and everything, and the arguing issues of law, and we're litigating that hard. Our Chief Counsel Kevin Snyder is litigating that, working on that with our team of attorneys. What this means, though, is the Supreme Court said, okay, we're going to go ahead and not wait for the Ninth Circuit to stop something that is, we're convinced, is an egregious potential violation of rights. So open up the churches in Santa Clara County, let them have indoor services, safely, prudently, but let them have indoor services until the Ninth Circuit decision, they come down with their decision, and until that comes up to us and we rule completely on the merits. In their decision, they said, at that time, we'll decide whether this is a permanent injunction or whether we throw out the injunction altogether. He said, but they said in the meantime, 6 out of the 9 said, to us, it's pretty blatantly a violation of our precedent that we've already set in the New York case. Open up these churches in Santa Clara County. They may think, being Silicon Valley, home of big tech, that they're somehow aloof and separate. The Supreme Court didn't buy that and said, no, you're like all the other counties in California. You're held under the same Constitution.
So, Brad, while this is not the final word, it certainly bodes well for what that final word might be.
Yes, it's unusual. It's very unusual to get an emergency injunction from the United States Supreme Court while something is still pending at the circuit court level. This is not very normative at all. It's highly unusual to get this. The fact that they were willing to grant it is very telling, in a very good way, of what we can expect at the end of the road with this case. And I believe this court is setting the case law now to basically say, as they're having the New York case and they did in the case out of San Diego, basically they're saying that in the future, if there's ever a shutdown of churches, you have to give them the same rights and privileges of any other secular or, quote, essential institutions like airports and subways and the like. I think that is effectively going to prevent a complete shutdown of churches from happening in the future. We may have limitations. We may have occupancy restrictions, but it can't be any more stringent than what's applied to secular institutions like stores and other gathering places.
Well,
so that's what we're looking forward to going forward with this case law, thanks to President Trump's appointment of Amy Coney Barrett.
Well, let me focus on that one aspect for a moment, Brad, because some of these bureaucrats and leftists in government can be very creative. And one of the arguments that the county made was stating how churches are not technically closed. They are allowed to operate at 20% capacity, but they just can't worship together indoors. People can come in and pray, they can go to bookstores, but they can't gather. And that is across the board. No one else can gather either. Well, I mean, that is so, egregious, because what is the business of a church? It's a place where people gather together for worship. That's like saying you have a donut store, you just can't sell donuts.
Right. And they argued that. They said, look, everything else, they're not being treated differently. We pointed out factually that they are being treated because the county airport, the airport in San Jose, is owned by Santa Clara County. It's county property. So it's under their jurisdiction. Well, that airport does not have limitations on occupancy. It's filled with people. The airplanes docked in that airport leaving are filled. Yeah. Every chair is filled. Every seat is filled. So the court, looked at transportation earlier. We're convinced they looked at it in our observations that we had well documented in our litigation, as well as other forms of gathering and transportation. So the court didn't use their narrow perspective. They looked at the big picture and said, no, churches are essential effectively, and they are entitled to, at the very least, the same degree of occupancy and function as other forms of gathering, including airports. I'm sure that was a part of their thinking in rejecting Santa Clara County's reasoning.
So, Brad, this has been almost a year-long struggle for many churches there in California in particular because of Gavin Newsom and his overreaching regulations on the churches. But this really comes back to a point I've brought up many times on this program, is that this court case, while it was a emergency ruling, and we'll be waiting to see the final outcome. You wouldn't even have gotten this far had there not been pastors and churches willing to challenge the overreach of the government.
Absolutely. Pacific Justice Institute cannot file a lawsuit without a client to defend a plaintiff. And we had 5 churches there in Santa Clara County that stepped up. We gave them very wise counsel, mind you, so they would not be in a predicament of having, millions of dollars of judgment against them, losing their buildings potentially. We were very wise in how we counseled them. At the same time, they were prudent, and yet they were also bold to allow us to represent them in a way that we could get the case up to the Supreme Court. I also want to encourage people, like with regard to the Governor Gavin Newsom, it looks like there will be a recall election. It looks like they're going to definitely have the signatures. And there's a lot of businesses out there, Tony, that are also very frustrated, very angry across the country in blue states, in purple states. And so to help them, we developed an 18-page legal analysis, a memorandum on how businesses can reopen in spite of tyrannical governor orders to the contrary. And that's been very empowering for people in the business sector as well. And that's on our website at pji.org.
And I encourage you folks to, if you're in business and you're in one of these states that has the overreaching tyrannical arm of a Democratic governor, mayor, look at this data. And there are public interest law firms like Brad's at Pacific Justice that are willing to represent you as you stand justifiably for your First Amendments. And Brad, that's the point I wanted to underscore, is that we keep our freedom only when we use our freedom. To say we have it but lock it away and not be willing to challenge government when it crosses the line, by our silence, we acquiesce to their overreach.
Exactly. It's one thing for churches to say, okay, we're going to be prudent. We're going to do what we can to be safe and be above reproach, so no one blames us for a pandemic. It's another thing for churches to throw in the towel and just say we're going to forsake the congregating together completely and let our churches be shut down and have no indoor services in the wintertime. That's often the only kind of church service the church can have for obvious reasons. So it's real important for churches to understand, unless we lay claim to our rights with society we have today, unfortunately, and the obvious hostility that we're facing as people of faith, we will lose those rights unless we lay claim to them, and to do so wisely and professionally. And that's what we at Pacific Justice do without charge in 11 offices all across the United States, coast to coast. Where we're here to serve anyone needing assistance without charge. And
I think I want to go back to the point you made that we need to approach these things with prudence. We need to use the sound science, not the left's manufactured science. I don't trust people that can't tell the difference between male and female, so I don't trust their science. But you look at the science, and 98% of the churches, when this first came out, they shut down for a while because the President Trump said, hey, we got to slow the spread. But that 15 days turned into 30. Then it's, nearly a year. At some point, you just have to say, wait a minute, we did our part, but we don't see the sky falling as some predicted would occur. So you just have to, as many of the pastors, and I'm sure the ones you're dealing with, have ultimately come to the decision of who do you obey, God or man? And we're going to take our chances with obeying God.
Right. And initially, we didn't know if this was going to be the bubonic plague. We didn't know.
Right.
Now we do. And science and statistics rationality is based in supporting the position of allowing churches to once again meet. And so I think churches are in a very strong position. The doctrine, the Jacobson rule that the court was initially using, saying we have to defer to the government, let the governors do what they want, we're not scientists. There's only 3 judges on the Supreme Court now that have that position. We have the rest of the judges respect the First Amendment and that churches are essential. I'm very optimistic, Tony, moving forward. But we can't let up. We need to continue this fight, and I'm very optimistic in the end that we'll prevail.
Brad, we're out of time, but I want to congratulate you on a job well done. Great to have you on the program.